This is the story of Alitalia Flight 618. The year is 1970, and it's the 15th of September. A DC-8 was operating a flight from Rome to New York. The DC-8 had 146 passengers and 10 crew members on board. Hold on a second, they put a quad jet all the way from Rome to New York to just carry 146 passengers? To put that into context, a 737 can carry more people. How do they make the economics work for this flight? Today, you do have non-stop flights between Rome and New York, but they're always served by larger twin-engine jets like the 777 or the A350 or the 767 or the A330. Looking back with today's mindset, it seems almost comical to put a quad-engine DC-8 with just 146 people on board across the Atlantic. Unsurprisingly, Alitalia has only recorded 1 year of profit in its entire history from 1946. Leave your guess as to which year in the comments. I'll reveal the answer at the end of the video. Questionable route planning decisions aside, the plane left Rome at 4:22 a.m. EST or 10 a.m. local time, bound for New York. The Atlantic crossing was uneventful. As the DC-8 was approaching a navigational point about 120 nautical miles northeast of JFK International Airport, the controllers cleared the plane to descend from 31,000 feet to 20,000 feet. By the time the plane was 32 nautical miles from the airport, they had gotten all the way down to 6,000 feet. JFK Radar Approach Control now had the plane on radar, and they gave the pilots all the information that they need to land at the airport. Things like altimeter settings, winds, fog, that sort of stuff. Today, though, the pilots got a bit of news that they were not expecting. The ILS to runway 4 right was out of commission. The ILS, or the Instrument Landing System, is this radio beacon that can guide planes right down to the foot of the runway. It's not essential, but having it's a nice to have, like a warm cup of tea in the morning. So, the first officer took control of the plane and started following the vectors that air traffic control was giving them to line up with the runway. The controller was giving them all sorts of vectors. He asked them to speed up and then slow down, etc. By 1:18 p.m., the controller was almost done setting the plane up for the approach to runway 4 right. He said, "Alitalia 618, you're 3.5 from the marker, turn right 020, cleared ILS 4 right approach." But the crew had a problem. They still had a lot of stuff to do and not enough time. So they prepared the aircraft as fast as they could, and they put the plane into a 1,000 foot per minute descent in an attempt to get the plane onto the right glide slope. As the jet came out of the clouds, the captain noticed that the plane was way too high and a bit to the right of the runway. He now had a decision to make. He could either go around and try again, or he could try and salvage this approach. He chose the latter option. The DC-8 started to drop like a stone. It was expected that the plane would ease up sooner or later, but it just kept falling and falling. The plane touched down hard, and immediately the pilots knew that they were no longer in control of the plane. The plane yawed from left to right and back again. From the controller's point of view, they knew that something was wrong. The landing was so hard that they watched the fuselage of the plane buckle. They saw smoke and flames from a point on the wing roots. Engines 3 and 4 were ripped from the wing as the plane went down the runway. This landing had not gone well. The pilots were trying their best to keep the plane on the runway, but it was of no use. The plane went off to the left and into the soft mud. The landing gear, which was already damaged from the hard landing, could take no more and were ripped off the plane. Not being able to take any more, the fuselage was ripped open as it came to a stop. Seeing all of this unfold, the controllers immediately sounded the crash alarm. Fire and rescue were on the scene in seconds. Incredibly, all 157 people on board survived. 64 people did receive non-fatal injuries. That in itself is a miracle. Just look at a picture of the wreck. It looks absolutely scary. But we like a story where everyone walks away over here, and this is one of those stories. One of the first things that the investigators looked at was the weight and balance of the plane. An overweight landing could explain what the controllers saw. When the plane took off, it weighed 337,000 pounds or 150 tons, well below its maximum takeoff weight. When it was time for landing, the plane weighed about 212,000 pounds, or 96 tons, which was well below its maximum landing weight. Their weight was not a problem for this landing, so the investigators then wondered if the instruments of the pilots were functioning well. They took airspeed indicators from the cockpit and tested them to see if they were working. They were, so the pilots were getting accurate information from the instruments on their way down. This accident started to make sense when they talked to the captain of Alitalia Flight 618. When they came out of the clouds, the plane was a bit too high and a bit to the right. So, to get the plane back on glide, the captain pulled back power on all 4 engines. This isn't out of the ordinary and is expected, but this captain went further. He pulled engines 2 and 3, the inboard engines on the DC-8, into reverse. Now, reverse thrust is usually on the ground. Reverse thrust basically redirects thrust from the engines in the direction of travel, slowing the plane down. This is great if you're slowing down on the ground, but using them in the air can be disastrous in certain cases. That is because reverse thrust in the air has the potential to really mess with the stability of the plane. The thing is, the captain's use of the thrust reverser in the air half worked. When he engaged the thrust reverser in the air, the plane started to drop fast, but then he made a crucial mistake. When he engaged the thrust reverser, the plane was in the air, coming down fast, and the cockpit was quite busy. As the landing came closer and closer, the captain flared the plane for the touchdown. But he forgot one thing. He did not take engines 2 and 3 out of reverse. This meant that the plane touched down so hard that the forces on the plane were strong enough to buckle the fuselage itself. But should Flight 618 even have attempted the landing though? The Alitalia manual said that if you were 400 feet above the ground and you were not on the correct glide path or at the right speed, then you had to go around, no questions asked. Flight 618 did not meet those criteria and so should have gone around. ATC also had some blame in the accident. The rule books say that a plane should be set up for an approach in such a way that it intercepts the localizer 7 miles from the threshold of the runway. But flight data showed that Flight 618 passed to the right of the interception point and did not get on the localizer till they were about 3 to 4 miles from the threshold. So, ATC inadvertently set the plane up to a point where it was very high for the landing. Due to a combination of factors, which included the crew's delay in prepping the plane for landing and the vectoring by ATC, the plane ended up way too high and fast. It never really got on the glide slope for the approach. In this case, a split-second decision to go ahead with the landing almost turned fatal. But why did the captain make that fateful decision to press on with the landing when going around was a perfectly acceptable option? Maybe the long flight had somehow impaired the captain's judgment, or maybe it was just one bad choice. Why do you think the captain went ahead with the landing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's go back to the thrust reverser maneuver, shall we? Should he have even been doing that? Well, the short answer is no. The long answer is also no, but here's why. In most other jet aircraft, using the thrust reverser in the air is absolutely out of the question. In fact, on most other airplanes, the reversers won't even engage if you're not on the ground. But on the DC-8, you are allowed to set the engines to reverse if you're above 190 knots and if the flaps aren't out. In the case of Flight 618, the flaps were out, so the pilot should not have engaged the thrust reversers. This situation of being able to use the reversers sometimes in the air removed a psychological block that pilots may have had on another airline. Using the reversers just didn't feel wrong because you were used to doing it from time to time. In another plane, it would feel like you were breaking a cardinal rule of flying or something. The captain knew that using reverse thrust was the wrong thing to do, but when he was in that position of being too high and too fast, the reverse thrust was right there like a get-out-of-jail-free card or something. And unfortunately for all on board, he let himself use the technique that he should not have. Had the captain had more time, he might have opted against using such a risky technique so close to the ground. One question that I had from the get-go while researching this crash was, how was this crash not worse? I mean, everyone survived, despite the severity of the crash. Part of the answer was the quick response by the JFK rescue services, and part of the reason came down to the crew. When the pilots knew that they were going to crash, they immediately started on the emergency engine shutdown procedures. This meant that when the plane did break apart, the risk of fire was greatly reduced, and that in all likelihood saved a lot of lives. Oh, and by the way, Alitalia's only profitable year was 1998. If you want to watch another video like this, then you can watch the video about Air Canada Flight 624, link on your screen right now. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.